Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Get ready.
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Are you ready? Get ready for the SAT.
It is the recommendation of Prince George's County Public Schools that most students take the SAT during the spring of their junior year. No student should take the SAT without prior preparation, and it should be known that it takes approximately 4 hours. During this program, you will become familiar with how to approach the different types of questions on the SAT, how to work within time constraints, and how to look for clues to reason through complex questions.
Hello, I'm James Miller, and I teach SAT Prep in Prince George's County. Today, we're going to look at some general SAT information as well as some general strategies for the reading and math sections of the SAT. We're going to start with some frequent answers to some frequently asked questions as well as some general strategies for the SAT. Are you ready? Let's get started. How often is the SAT given? 7 times a year, either October, November, December, January, and then either March or April, and then May or June. It's often a good idea for juniors to take the SAT either in May or June, and then again in October, November, December of their senior year. It's a good idea to talk to your guidance counselor and see what they think. Where do I take the SAT? Check with your guidance counselor. If the test is not being administered at your neighborhood high school, it is most likely being administered at a school close to where you live. What do I take with me on test day? You need a ticket, a photo ID, that's very important, pencils, a calculator, make sure it's a calculator you're familiar with, a watch, a snack, a plan, very important, and also a positive attitude. You want to try to be as positive as possible when you're taking this very long test. How many questions are on the SAT? There are 67 reading questions, 54 math questions, and 49 writing questions, plus 1 essay on every SAT. This is always the same for every SAT. Please note, though, that this does not include the experimental section because that section will not be scored, and those questions do not count. Next, how many different sections are there on the SAT? There are 2 25-minute reading sections, 2 25-minute math sections, 1 20-minute reading, 1 20-minute math, 1 25-minute experimental section that does not get scored, 1 25-minute writing section, 1 10-minute writing section, and then the 25-minute essay. Please note that the 25-minute essay is always the first section of the SAT. It's always the first thing that you're going to do. Also, the experimental section, it could be a reading section, a writing section, or a math section. You're never going to know. It's always 25 minutes long, and it will not get scored. How is the test scored? 2400 is the highest possible score. 600 is the lowest possible score. So you have a 200 to 800 for reading, a 200 to 800 for math, and a 200 to 800 for writing. Please note, most colleges are separating the writing score when they're considering students for admission to their university. The writing score is usually kept separate. Therefore, what you want to do is you want to look at your reading and math score combined out of 1600, and that'll give you a good idea of where you can go to college or university. The best thing to do is call the college or university and find out their policy on the SAT writing section. Are questions arranged in order of difficulty? This is very important. Sets of sentence completion questions appear in order of difficulty. That means that number 1 is usually easier than number 4, which is usually easier than number 6. The questions go from easier to harder as you go up the numbers. The reading passages, short, medium, and long, are not in any particular order. That means that the very first question could be the most difficult, and the very last question could be the easiest. You never know. The math questions supposedly go from easier to difficult. The math questions in general go from easier to difficult. It also depends on your level of math. The questions are usually arranged in some sort of a mixed order of algebra and geometry and arithmetic, so you have to decide what your best area is, algebra, geometry, arithmetic. But for the most part, the higher the number on the math questions, the more difficult the question is going to be. Lastly, we have the writing questions. Writing multiple choice questions are all fairly equal. Difficulty level is all fairly equal. Should I guess if I don't know the answer? This is a very important tip for the SAT. Do not randomly guess. You only guess if you can eliminate 2 answers. The reason for that is because you get 1 point for every correct answer. However, you lose 1/4 of a point for every incorrect answer. Therefore, 4 wrong answers equals -1 point. Always guess on student-produced math questions. These are the questions that require you to fill in an answer in a grid. We call them grid-ins. Those questions you will not lose any credit for getting an incorrect answer. There's 10 of those on the SAT. Every SAT contains 10 of those questions. Always try to answer them. Never guess an answer because you have not bubbled in that letter recently. This is a major problem for many students. Students think, oh, I haven't answered C in a long time, so this one is probably C. That's not very good reasoning. Make sure you go through each answer choice and eliminate answers. After you've eliminated 2 answers, then guess between the remaining ones. If you cannot eliminate answers, then leave the question blank. That's usually the best policy. Tips and strategies. For reading questions, there are 19 sentence completions. Every sentence contains a built-in clue that leads you to the correct answer. We're going to look at some of those in a little bit. 48 reading comprehension questions. Read for the main idea, the tone, and inferences. Answers are often paraphrases, so it's a good idea to practice your paraphrases. Answers are not always in the lines you are told to look at, so you have to look a little before and a little after the lines they give you. The passage-based reading questions. 8 questions from what I call short passages. There are 2 short passages followed by 2 questions each. There is 1 short paired passage followed by 4 questions. Then you have 40 questions from medium to long passages. 2 what I call medium length passages followed by anywhere from 6 to 9 questions. You also have 1 long passage followed by 10 to 15 questions, and then 1 long paired passage followed by 10 to 15 questions. For these, you want to divide and conquer. Read one at a time. Answer questions about both passages only after you have answered the questions about each one. We're going to talk about those paired passages a little bit later. Those are very difficult, so we're going to break it down for you in detail. Next, we have some general math strategies. Review and know algebra and geometry. Translate word problems as you read. Know the terms. Is means equal to. Of means multiplication or times. Work the problem in your textbook. Remember, in the test booklet, because you don't have any scratch paper, so you've got to write in the test booklet. Use a calculator only when necessary. Plug in numbers when possible. It's often a good idea to plug in random numbers for questions. For instance, if you see a percent sign, it's usually a good idea to try 100%. Plug in the answer choices. Sometimes you can work in reverse. You can start with choice C, and that will help you eliminate answers. Those are some general reading and math strategies. We're going to look at some specific things in a little bit. Now let's look at what parents can do to help students for the SAT. Parents, you can work on SAT vocabulary. Purchase the official SAT study guide. We're going to be looking at some things out of the official SAT study guide. It's a valuable resource for the SAT because it's a resource put out by the College Board, and they're the company that actually writes the SAT. So it's a good resource. Make SAT an ongoing homework activity. No homework? Try some vocabulary. Try some timed practice tests out of the SAT study guide. Computer SAT practice. If you go to school in PG County, then you have access to the Triumph Learning program, which is on pgcps.org. At the bottom, in alphabetical order, under Students, you will see SAT Practice. You can also go to the official SAT online course. That's collegeboard.com. See your guidance counselor for information on that course. These are free resources online that students can use at home. Please utilize them. Also, SAT Word of the Day. Most schools in Prince George's County use SAT Words of the Day. That's a good idea to practice those words. Create some index cards, some note cards with the word on the front and the definition on the back. This will help you improve your SAT vocabulary immensely. Parents, you can also encourage students to read. I often say that the SAT is a reading test. So how do you improve your score? You read more. It's a good idea to read the newspaper and magazines whenever you get the opportunity. The book is always better than the movie. Turn off the TV and the video games and the computer and read some. Limit cell phone usage. Let students see you reading, parents. Have a read-in night, parents, one night a week where everybody in the family decides to read for about an hour or so. Also, parents, make sure your child is taking the PSAT in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. It's always a good idea. That's good practice. The 9th and 10th grade PSAT doesn't matter as much as the 11th grade, but it's still good practice. So I advise you to take the PSAT every year. Also, take SAT prep, preferably in 11th grade. An SAT prep course in PG County will help you improve your SAT scores if you practice. Let's look at some more specific things. For critical reading, here's what we want to do. We want to read the passage carefully. And then we want to read the questions carefully as well. Be prepared for the most frequently asked question types. These include main idea, specific details, implications and inferences, vocabulary in context, mood, style, tone of the author. Remember, most of the questions are paraphrases, so you want to practice. The correct answer choice is usually worded differently in the passage. The answer is somewhere there in the passage. You just have to go and find it. Remember, the SAT is an open book test. Use it as such. Main idea strategy. Frequently, several of the answer choices look correct and seem to be possible correct choices. Know why an answer may be wrong. The incorrect answers are often too broad. I always put a B beside those. The incorrect answers, some of them are too narrow. I put an N beside those. Some of them are pulled quotes. These are questions where these are answer choices where the quote comes directly from the passage, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the correct answer. Some answers are inaccurate as well. This is where they'll pull a quote, but they'll change one or two words just to trick you a little bit. Be aware of those. If you're aware of the incorrect answers, that will help you eliminate answers. Remember, if you can eliminate two answer choices, that's when you want to guess from the remaining ones. Vocabulary and context questions appear on every SAT. These questions are usually not too difficult. Students are not being asked to define a word, but are asked to figure out what a word means based upon how it is used. That's the context of the word. So it's always a good idea to answer these questions whenever possible. Some of them are difficult, but most of them you can go to a couple of lines and then answer the question based upon the context in which the word is used. Next, we have the very important inference questions. These answers are suggested but not directly stated in the passage. These questions are often level 3 or level 4 questions on the SAT. Students often struggle with inferences. They're very similar to paraphrases, but a little bit different. Here's why. There's a hint or a suggestion or an inference. If a question contains one of these words, it is most likely an inference question. But the problem is, inferences are usually straightforward, but they're not stated directly. They are consistent with the main idea. So eliminate choices that go beyond the facts. Avoid jumping to extreme conclusions. Inference questions show up on every SAT. It's important to recognize them. Important to know that you have to go back into the passage to find the answer for inferences questions. Make sure that you eliminate answers that go to extremes or go beyond the scope of the main idea of the passage. Next, we have the very important paired passage questions. This is where you have two related passages, always on the same topic or the same subject, with one set of questions. We have very specific strategies for these. Many students have mentioned that these strategies are very helpful for paired passages. First, you read passage 1 and then answer the passage 1 questions. Usually there'll be anywhere from 3 to 5 questions only about passage 1. After you answer the questions that are only about passage 1, go back and read passage 2 and look for the passage 2 questions. Again, usually 3 to 5 of those questions. Finally, you have questions that are on both passages. Again, 3 to 5 of those. Those are the most difficult. You want to save those until last. Questions are usually mixed. Write a 1, a 2, and a star next to each of the questions prior to reading the passages. This is a very good strategy, a very good technique. Just before you read passage 1, skim the questions and mark a 1 next to questions that are only about passage 1, a 2 next to questions that are only about passage 2, and a star next to those questions that are about both passages. Remember, the ones that are about both passages are often the most difficult questions in the section, so save those until the end. Next, we have sentence completion questions. Read the entire sentence carefully and clearly understand the ideas being expressed. Try to fill in the blank with your own words. Each sentence has a built-in clue that will help you determine the correct answer. Work one blank at a time for 2 blank questions. Remember, some questions have 2 blanks. Do one blank at a time. Break it down. Let's look at some examples. If you learn the types of sentence completions, you can identify the clues. For instance, many questions on the SAT are definitional sentences. Bolivar came to be known as a great blank for his role in leading the people of Latin America to victory in their wars of independence against Spain. Wars of independence, victory. So he became to be known as what? Well, let's eliminate some answers. A donor? No, probably not. A compromiser? No. He led them to victory in war. An orator? He wasn't a great speaker. Was he a great moderator? Probably not. He's a great liberator because he led them to freedom, to independence. Definitional sentences are often the most common on the SAT. Please recognize that many sentences contain the definition of the answer within the sentence. Find it, underline it, and then eliminate answers. Next, we have contrast sentences. The previous workers at the store had been rather blank, but the new owners hired employees who were unfailingly polite. But is our contrast word. Pay attention to the contrast. It suggests a shift within the sentence. We need an opposite, a shift of unfailingly polite. Well, that would be a word like rude. So we want to look for a word that means the same as rude. If we look at our answer choices, we can see that we can eliminate words like verbose and entertaining. Those don't mean rude. Same as efficient and gracious. We want discourteous because discourteous means rude. Notice we found the contrast word and we circled it, and then we looked for the key word. The key word here was polite. We needed the opposite of polite because there was a shifter within this sentence. The contrast word but suggested a shift within the sentence. Other contrast words include rather than and however. Look for those words. Whenever you see them on the SAT, circle them. Next, we have cause and effect sentences. Unhappy customers complained that because of the blank of the popular new automobile, dealers were charging blank prices. Well, they complained. This is cause and effect. It has the word because in there. So they were unhappy. They complained because of the blank of the popular new automobile, dealers were charging, let's look at this blank, expensive or high prices. Usually people complain when something is expensive or high. If we look at the second blank, we want a word that means the same as expensive or high. Well, that means we can eliminate reasonable. That one doesn't work, so we eliminate A. Excessive works. That's the same as expensive. Equitable, equal, equitable. That one really doesn't work, so we're going to eliminate that. Extravagant might work, though it doesn't sound too good. Exorbitant works because exorbitant means out of the orbit, therefore very expensive. So we've eliminated A and C. Now let's go to the first blank. Unhappy customers complain that because of the blank. Well, let's plug in. The surplus of the new automobile, dealers were charging high prices. No, if you have a lot of something, you're not going to charge high prices. Because of the obscurity, they were charging extravagant prices. Okay, maybe, but that doesn't sound too good. I think we can do better than that. Because of the scarcity, if something is scarce, that means there's not a lot of them. Well, if there's not a lot of a car, they would probably charge high prices if a lot of people want it. So they're going to charge these high prices because it's scarce. Exorbitant means high. There's our answer, E. On cause and effect sentences, recognize the word because, also a word like since. Whenever you see it, circle it. Let's go on to the next one. Next, we see a synonym sentence. Since the king believed his prime minister to be both blank and trustworthy, he refused to consider the possibility that his advisor could be a traitor. Notice, I've just underlined a few key words here. I circled since because that's usually a cause and effect word. I also see the word and here, and trustworthy. That means whatever goes in this blank is the same as trustworthy. It's a positive word. It also means it's the opposite of a traitor. Well, perfidious is the same as traitor, so we're going to eliminate that. Deceitful is the same as traitor. We're going to eliminate that. Seditious is similar to traitor, so we're going to eliminate that. And elusive means hard to catch. That really doesn't fit at all. Our answer, therefore, is steadfast. Steadfast is trustworthy. Very trustworthy, steadfast. If you're steadfast, then that means you stand by somebody. That's our right answer. Remember, for these synonym sentences, look for a pattern with the word and coming after a blank, and then look for a synonym word. In this sentence, the synonym word was trustworthy. Lastly, we have some general strategies for reading. Read to determine main idea, inferences, and tone. These are the key most important things when you're reading a passage. Whenever I read a passage, I look for the tone and I note whether it's a positive or a negative tone within the margin. Do not try to remember the entire passage. That's not very useful. But what you should do is you mark up the passage as you read. Underline key words and phrases as you read. Circle contrast and cause and effect words. Take notes on the margin. Is it positive or negative? Remember, the test booklet is yours. Please write in it. You paid for that test booklet, then you should be writing in the test booklet. It's also very helpful to keep you active as you read. So please write in the test booklet. That doesn't mean underline everything. It just means underline key words and phrases. Concepts you need to know for math. We're going to do a quick math review. In general, you need to know arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and miscellaneous. Following, I have some tables that you need to be familiar with. You need to understand them and can apply them to a variety of math problems. So let's go through a few general math concepts, starting with arithmetic. Problem solving that involves simple addition, subtraction, multiplication. Conceptual understanding of arithmetic operations with fractions. Fractions are very important on the SAT. Averages, the arithmetic mean, the median, and the mode. These are good things to review before the SAT, especially if you haven't seen them in a long time. Properties of integers, odd and even numbers. What are the prime numbers? Do you remember the prime numbers? Positive and negative numbers. Remember factors, divisibility, and multiples. Remember least common multiple and greatest common factor. These are general arithmetic things that will help you improve your SAT math score. Also, look for word problems. Word problems involving such concepts as rate, time, and distance. These are common on the SAT. There's always a percent problem on the SAT. You always need to know the average, the arithmetic mean. You also need to know how number line works, the order and the betweenness and consecutive numbers. Don't forget about ratio and proportion as well. Ratios are simply fractions. Tedious or long computations are never included on the SAT. You never need to do any long math or any big computations. The most you'll need is a calculator for maybe some multiplication or some division. That's about it. Geometry is a big part of the SAT math portion. Remember properties of parallel and perpendicular lines. These are good things to study. Angle relationship, vertical angles and angles in geometric figures. Don't forget about the properties of triangles, that every triangle is 180 degrees. Don't forget about right triangles and isosceles triangles and triangles that are 30, 60, 90. Remember, the special right triangles, they'll give you the information on the SAT, but it's often important and helpful to know what a 30, 60, 90 triangle is before you step into the SAT. Even though they give it to you on the test, it will save you time if you remember the properties before the SAT. Also, properties of polygons, perimeter, area, angle measures. When you're looking at geometry, don't forget about properties of circles. Every circle is 360 degrees. Don't forget about circumference and radius as well, diameter. Solids, what's volume? Remember, they give you the formula for a volume on the SAT, but it's helpful to know it before you get to the test. Don't forget about slope and coordinate geometry. Don't forget about coordinates of points. What they will not ask you to do, they will never include proofs. Geometric proofs are never included on the SAT. They don't include volumes other than rectangular solids and those given in reference material or in an individual question. These are things you don't need to know for the SAT. Next, we have algebra. Algebra and geometry constitute most of the math portion along with the arithmetic. Operations involving signed numbers. Word problems. Remember, you need to practice translating verbal statements into algebraic expressions. Don't forget the substitution method. You can substitute numbers in. Simplifying algebraic expressions. Don't forget about elementary factoring skills as well. Solving algebraic equations and inequalities. Don't forget how to solve for one variable. Always be able to solve for one variable on the SAT. They're very common. Manipulation of positive integers and exponents and root. And don't forget simple quadratic equations as well. Lastly, the things that are not included on the algebra section. Complicated manipulations with radicals and roots. They will include some radicals and some squares and square roots, but nothing very complicated. Don't worry about solving quadratic equations that require the use of the quadratic formula. You really don't need to know the quadratic formula. Exponents that are not whole numbers. Occasionally they will include exponents like these kind of exponents, 2 to the 3 over 2. These might be included occasionally, but not very often on the SAT math section. Might be a good idea to review those with your math teachers. What we've done today is we've looked at some few general SAT strategies to help you. We've answered some frequently asked questions as well. It's a good idea before you take the SAT to know what you're getting yourself into. Know how many questions there are. Know what you need to score in order to get a score to get you into your college or university of your choice. Talk with your guidance counselors at your high school. If they can't answer your questions, maybe they can tell you somebody who can answer your questions. It's a good idea to be prepared, and be prepared means to study and review as much as possible. So please take the time to go online and practice these things, whether it's with the Triumph Learning Program or the College Board Program. The more you practice, the more your score is going to improve. And that's what we want. We want good, high SAT scores. So keep practicing as much as possible.